afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending Racial Awareness and What Are You Doing to Impact Change and How Are You Communicating with this community? We're so happy to have our TAG Diversity and Inclusion Society here today promoting and putting this event out there. It's going to be a great event. I just want to put a quick note out there. Please make sure you check our website for upcoming events. We have a lot of virtual events in the future, as well as a golf tournament this fall and Converge and FinTech South. Now I'm going to pass it over to Trinell to start the program.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Tag Online, for helping us put this together. Everyone, I am so pleased and excited to introduce our panel to you. We are so fortunate to have 4 esteemed participants of the corporate industry here to discuss on behalf of TAG Diversity and Inclusion, racial awareness, what are you doing to impact change, and how are you communicating this in your company? We're going to start with our moderator today, Maxine Cain. And Maxine, if you will just, as soon as I introduce each participant, if you'll just take over. First, we have Mallom Liggom from WarnerMedia, Vishal Venkatram from GE Power. We have Michael Sullivan, Southern Company Gas, and Chloe Barzey, Accenture. Thank you guys, we appreciate you and look forward to a very, very engaging conversation. And everyone, Q&A will begin at 12:45 after we have the panel discussion. Thank you. Take it over, Maxine.
Thank you, Trinell. Well, my name is Maxine Cain, and I'm the founder and president of STEM Atlanta Women here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm really honored to moderate this panel today. And we have some great leaders here. So as you guys all know, we are talking about how you or your organization is impacting change and how you are communicating this within your organization. So I want you to kind of think about it in that framework. So the first question is going to go to Chloe, and then of course we're going to kind of go around the room and ask you guys to consider the same question. So Chloe, how has COVID-19 impacted you personally, corporately, and globally? And you can answer that for both you and your organization, Accenture.
Okay, so first of all, personally, I'm a mom of 3 children. And so, you know, I continue to struggle every day thinking about what does back to school look like. And I think about it from the perspective, I have a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 19-year-old. So I'm thinking about, you know, middle school, lower school, and college. And so it's a concern I think about every day is how do I keep my children safe and keep going. And of course, there are no right answers to that one, right? So I talk to all the moms and we just try and figure it all out together, but no one knows. And I talk to dads and they don't know either. So we're all in the same boat. But as I think about corporately, you know, I've been amazed at how fast we've been able to adjust as a company to working remotely. So our CEO did a great job just, you know, and this was back in, I think it was probably May, when she announced that we'll be working remotely through Q2, which is the end of February. So wow. We are, you know, and had planned to work remotely, you know, for a while. And so this is great because people are amazed at how much you can actually do working remotely and how much you can accomplish that you didn't think you could accomplish before. And as I think about it, we have global teams. So for my client, I have over, you know, personally, I've seen us adjust in a week to having thousands of people working in Bangalore remotely, which is amazing. So as I think about globally, I think about not just the US, but globally, you know, the care and safety of our people is always number one. And so, you know, making sure that they've got the right equipment, they've got the right connectivity, all the same things you think about for your children in terms of making sure they have the resources needed to work. We think about for our people, making sure they're safe, making sure they've got the right equipment. And then as I think about our clients, I mean, this is a fantastic time for companies to rethink competency that they wish that they'd invested in before. So to be more digital, to be more data-driven, to really work in the cloud, to have more variable cost structures, to be more agile in terms of the capabilities, thinking about what are the capabilities they need right now to take them through the pandemic, but also, how do they shift long term to be more agile, and as they consider the steps to reopen, our clients are really thinking about broader digital transformation. So it's an exciting time in terms of transformation for companies while keeping our people safe.
That's amazing. And so with that, just one additional point or question, being that you are a mom and you had to really think through this personally, and you have everybody at home and you're dealing with this corporately and globally, how has it impacted you health-wise? Do you feel like you're under a lot of stress just trying to keep all the balls in the air?
Well, at first I was wondering why I was gaining weight until I realized I just wasn't moving. So what I realized is that
I know.
Personally, to take care of myself and relieve stress, I've just got to, get a routine going. And so I've established a routine where I get up in the morning, I walk with, some of the people in my neighborhood, but I've had to make sure that I keep moving, because otherwise, I keep growing. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's pretty awesome. And it sounds like you're doing a really good job. Mallom, I'm coming over to you now. Same question. What are you guys doing? How has COVID-19 impacted you personally, corporately, and globally?
Yeah, I'm gonna mirror a lot of what Chloe said, just from the father perspective. 3 young men, 2 of which tried to work from home with me. So it's been quite an impact in terms of getting things done. I'm specifically on the corporate side. It's been tough for me. Our companies responded incredibly well. We were, soon as, just to give you some perspective, I'm on WarnerMedia, but I work specifically with Turner Sports. So, we were about to start March Madness, and so you sports fans know the basketball just stopped, and then the NBA shut down, and then MLB shut down. So the sports we worked on sort of froze, and it's a job where I just love going into the studio, going into work, going into the office, talking to people. It's just an exciting place to be. So locking myself in as an introvert was incredibly difficult.
No.
But I'm adapting, and we're learning to work remotely and WebEx and Zoom calls and all of those things. So our companies just responded incredibly well. I think productivity's probably increased some. We learned to adapt to what those changes are. And one of the things that is helping us focus on is not just mitigation for the impact of COVID on our community and our fans and our business, but also opportunity. How might we, learn, because this new change has sped up the adaptation curve of new forms of media consumption, and that's great. We're already down that path, but it's sped us up a little bit, so that's been incredible.
So what's coming down the pike for us in the sports world? I know that's your arena. I'm curious to know, what should we be prepared for? Should we get excited? Is something coming new? Are we going to still just not be able to enjoy sports?
Yeah. We don't know. And if someone told you they knew, they'd be lying to you. But what we're going to see, we're starting to work on some sports programs. We have sports coming back. It will be without fans.
Oh, really? Without fans? Okay.
Hey, they're actually in a literal bubble. And the players are practicing now and getting together. We have our 10 team members in the bubble. And so we're going to see what this looks like. We're going to put sports on. I think sports is really important. It's not just watching competition and betting and having fun, but whenever our country's going through a real tragedy, whether it's a terrorist attack or a war, one of the ways we know we're back to a normal, even if it's a new normal, is the return of sports. Take that very seriously.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to be looking forward to it. Definitely looking forward to it, even with no fans. Michael Sullivan, it is your turn, Mr. Sullivan. Can you share with us how this has impacted you and your family, both personally, corporately, and globally as well?
Sure, absolutely, Maxine. And first of all, thank you all for allowing me to participate on this panel. Really appreciate that. I look at this, and personally, it's probably been less of a challenge for me as to some of what Chloe mentioned or whatever, because my kids are much older, right? So I don't have to deal with the homeschooling and those kind of things. It's just kind of stay in your corner of the house, and while I'm on a conference call, don't create any noise, right? But I do understand that is a significant challenge for a number of folks.
Yes.
And it brings to bear a lot of different things that have to be dealt with. And so what I just try to do personally, specifically, is, the stress level, it's a different kind of stress level. Right?
Mhm.
I remember at times where, when I was traveling into the office, one of the things that I got frustrated with was, the drive home and having to deal with the commute and the traffic and those kind of things. And now, as I'm at home, I'm thinking of, it'd be great to have that drive because it can be a woosah moment to just relax and be by yourself while you're in the car listening to some music or what have you. So it's really just having to adjust to that norm a little bit, and trying to figure out what's best for you to maintain that mental and physical and emotional health while we go through this. But I do see this as a new norm, right? I do see
Mhm. Yeah.
that we will not be going back to the way it was. And I think that every catastrophe yields opportunity. And being in the technology arena, I see that this has opened up a whole new door of opportunities to our senior leadership, the CEOs, thinking differently. I mean, we have jurisdictional, varied locations in terms of our company makeup. And in a lot of those cases, we've been somewhat used to having to work remotely or interact through video conferencing and those kind of things. But when you start talking about 18,000 plus people working from home and now getting and gaining data and evidence that you have the technology to support that paradigm shift, and how that potentially opens doors to you in terms of maybe
Mhm.
you're looking at cost savings, maybe you're looking at your real estate makeup, right? Maybe you're then looking at how you can leverage that going forward as part of the new norm, and creating that alternative aspect of your work infrastructure to allow people to take more advantage of working from home. So it's really opened the doors for our companies to have much broader conversations. We've stood up a number of reentry teams that
Mm.
one of those teams are looking at innovative ideas to say, okay, now that we're looking at how this is working and how it impacts our employees and what's our productivity looking like, what are things that we can take advantage of or even think about introducing that can bring greater value, that's technology driven, collaboration driven, and those kind of things to ensure that we can be successful in a new norm. So
Mhm.
really having some really productive conversations about what we look like going forward, and really taking, I think, a detailed look at how the reentry of our company and what that looks like on the horizon.
Awesome. It's interesting that you talk about the reentry because, there are many rules of thumbs around whether or not we should allow employees to work from home. So when COVID-19 hit us and we had no choice but to allow employees to work from home, were you surprised about the level of productivity, or did you even see an increased level of productivity at your organization?
Well, for me, it's definitely been a thing we've maintained. And I say that because within the technology realm, a lot of what we do is remote collaboration and interaction anyway. I mean, our projects are across multiple jurisdictions, operating companies, and those kind of things. And so we're kind of used to working from that perspective. But in other areas of our business, the feedback I've gotten from leaders in terms of the call centers and other areas such as that, they've seen a definite increase in productivity.
Mhm.
So that, again, drives them to think differently about what the new norm would look like in terms of offering more work from home opportunities as a common structure.
Awesome. Awesome. That's good to know. Good to know. Thank you, Michael. And Vishal, same question. We're curious to know what's happening with you and GE Power as it relates to COVID-19 and how it's impacted you personally, corporately, and globally as well.
So it's interesting. So I'll take the corporate bit first and then tie it into the personal piece. So we saw COVID starting to affect the organization sometime in December of last year. Because of our China presence. We're present in multiple global locations, and we saw China start showing sparks of being affected by COVID much earlier. So when it came here, we literally saw it coming more than not see it coming. So we were slightly better prepared from that perspective, from a corporate entity at that point. And as an organization, we were already scaled to allow for about 170,000 people to work remotely. And what we had to do was scale that up to make sure 250,000 people around the globe were able to work remotely. So those two things affected, those were quick wins for us that we were able to take it and run with. On the personal front, when we saw that coming, we were in an interesting spot. And we have two kids, 8 and 3. The 8-year-old is self-managing and can manage the transition between the real world and the virtual world, collaboration, not collaboration. The 3-year-old, very tough. It's not very easy. On top of it, in January, our au pair came in from France thinking she's going to experience the US way of life. Now, you had 3 different individuals with 3 different needs or expectations living under the same roof and all wanting to be productive in some way, shape, or form. And with a working spouse who's equally busy, there are times and days in the house that 4 or 5 Zoom meetings or 4 or 5 virtual meetings may be going on at the same time. One of the last roundtables that I did it from the backyard because there were 3 other meetings going on in the house. So this is quite,
Wow.
It's become de rigueur, where my 8-year-old now has the ability to have a Google Classroom schedule with Zoom meetings in them, homework in them, all of that. And she has her own Mac and she does the whole thing by herself. So I've just seen an 8-year-old starting to behave and act like a 13-year-old, which is a good thing and a bad thing. You guys, if you've been through that journey, I don't know how soon you want an 8-year-old to start behaving like a 13-year-old. So that's been an interesting one. And the other one was my au pair. She came in with some expectations, and with COVID, she felt very constrained. Now, we literally had to create a program set for her to say, how do you keep yourself busy and motivated through this journey? Because we want her to be happy. We want her to be part of our family. And I'm responsible, or we are responsible for her. So that was a big addition that we weren't expecting to be responsible for something like that. So those things were pretty interesting. Then coming back to my larger team, teams in multiple countries around the world. And we in the US tend to take space for granted. Working virtually for someone like us is second nature. We've all been used to. Most of us have offices in the house. We have dedicated nooks that we call our offices and things like that. But you go into countries like Slovakia, Switzerland, India, China, for example, and you start seeing space is not at a premium, or space is at such a premium that you can't afford to create these kinds of things. And that's been the big challenge, that how do you manage the stress level of managing an entire household and be productive and ensure the kids are taken care of. Now, that's a multi-dimensional game. That's not an easy one to fix or work through. But what we've done is we've literally kept open channels. People have the flexibility to take as much time as they want to make sure their needs are taken care of. That's the primary needs are taken care of. And the teams rallied brilliantly in supporting each other. We've had situations where some folks in my Bangalore team would have to leave or not show up virtually for 3 days because they have had to take care of certain things. And the teams in other parts of the world have stepped in and said, yes, we will cover for you, and that's not an issue. I haven't seen this level of camaraderie and teamwork in a very long time pre-COVID. It was there, but it wasn't to this extent. And I'm quite proud to say that, people have rallied behind this, knowing it's not something that anyone is responsible for. It's a global responsibility, and we all have to take matters into our hands to ensure that we feel responsible for each other. So I'm seeing the positive side of this, which globally, people are still wondering how US is going to deal with this. But outside of the US, I'm seeing a lot more cohesive responses to this particular situation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Do you see that they're a lot more collaborative and cohesive outside of the US? And I know that, you guys are not necessarily traveling, but do you find that the US teams are really supporting those other teams as well, because they need each other, right? They need each other. So how are they collectively partnering, collaborating, and sharing information to be productive as an organization?
It's pretty awesome. I've had teams that get on calls at 9 p.m. at night and be on calls till 12 a.m. just to make sure my Middle East teams and my teams in Far East Asia are supported very thoroughly, which in the old days may or may not have happened, knowing very well that there was another norm that they could go back to. But now we're seeing, irrespective of time zones that you live in, people are really reaching out and saying, I think tomorrow you may not, do you have a class for your kid between this hour and this hour? Can I schedule a meeting outside of that? I don't think that was even in our thoughts pre-COVID. But post-COVID, these variables are being taken into account, and people are very receptive. If I have to tell people I'm at a Publix during a conference call, people are like, oh, sure, why don't you grab something else for me? Is the part answer. It's not, oh, you are not at your desk or you're not working. It's more of nobody, all of us have to do these kinds of things. That's the beauty of the situation.
They're doing that with their children too. So people are a lot more tolerant if you have children at home and you're having to address an issue with the child because of schooling and what have you. So that's awesome, Vishal. It sounds like you guys are really doing a phenomenal job. I want to make sure that if we have questions, anyone in the audience, if you have questions, we would love to get your questions. And if you can place those in the Q&A feature, we're definitely going to come back around during the Q&A timeframe to get those questions. So please, please, please go ahead and place your questions in the Q&A feature and we'll get to it. Vishal, I want to come back to you for another question and we'll kind of go back around. And this one, as we were talking globally, we had another pretty significant hit that hit us pretty hard, fast. And that was the televised murder of George Floyd and the whole civil unrest that's going on around the country and this whole Black Lives Matter movement. How did that affect you personally? How did it affect you corporately? And how did it affect you globally? Because one thing that was really interesting to me, I woke up one day and I was watching the news and I saw that this was a global issue. I mean, everyone around the world was marching and protesting, and it just blew me away when I saw that. And it was so consistent. I mean, everybody all around the world. And I thought, how did that happen? How did that become a global, another pandemic, if you will? So I'm curious to know, like, when that happened to you and you and your family start to experience this whole George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement, how did it impact you? What were you guys thinking? How did you address this with your employees? And what was your thoughts around, because you have global teams, so I'm sure that you were dealing with it everywhere. So I'm curious to know your response to that.
So emotions are very tough to explain, but if I don't know which order it was in, was it anger, disappointment, to it happened again, to when is this going to stop, to what am I going to do about it? So I don't know which ones in which order and what magnitude. Very tough today. If you ask me when it happened, maybe anger and disappointment may be the first two reactions immediately. The second part of this is, now you are in a very multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic workforce that you manage, and each one has a perspective. And some felt victimized, some felt that they were going to see retributions or reparations from the actions based on who the actor was and who the perpetrator was, in whichever way you were going to look at it. So I not only heard from people who were Black, but I also heard from all the other races saying how angry and disappointed they were with what had happened. So once that emotion passed, I think it was more of what are we going to do differently. So the first thing that we did, we opened all lines of communication to anyone who wanted to talk. So it was, you would go into group meetings and team meetings and allow people to talk and allow people to ask questions about how they would be perceived if they decided not to come to work for a few days. Like, that's perfectly all right. You need to go through a healing process to make sure you were comfortable with the situation. Comfortable as in you were not accepting the situation, but you had accepted that this had happened and you needed to do something different or needed to influence change in the overall scheme of things. So that was the predominant first step that all of us took while we were with our teams in the US. Internationally, it took a very different sense. So let's take India, for example. India is very you would think all Indians are the same, but there are so much divisions within that, and they have their own murky way of dealing with differences. And I don't want to go deep into it, but it has the same underlying tones. Skin color may not represent some kind of bias, but there are other forms of bias that are inherent in the society. The same thing happens in Asia. The same thing happens in Middle East. It is all there. So unconscious bias and conscious bias is part and parcel of all of us being humans and being brought up in society in some way, shape, or form. So then we started having those discussions. They started asking questions about, I'm thinking of sending my kid to the US to study. Is this a safe place? My brother lives in Singapore, and every day I would say, are you guys safe? And it was a double whammy. It was our very uncertain response to COVID and all the dilly-dallying and wishy-washing with politics surrounding COVID and Black Lives Matter movement both happening at the same time. There were questions, is US still a safe place to live? Is US still a safe place to bring up kids? Am I investing too much in the US if it's going to be the hotbed of racial tension? So we started answering those questions. And we had to not only wear shoes that were large enough to explain what was going on in the US, but you also had to tell the teams what were the parallels that were going on. Then you had the Black Lives Matter equivalent in the UK, in France, and there were protests in Italy, there were protests all over the place. And as the movement spread its wings to all these countries, I think people started getting appreciation for what is actually happening around the world. And we are too far from calling ourselves healed in any way, shape, or form. But I think we have to get through the first two steps, accept that this is happening, and now fight for what needs to change.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot. You have some big shoes over there that you're having to walk in and maneuver. So I'm going to come back over to Michael Sullivan. I'm sure that, you're having the same or similar challenges, but what were your thoughts when it happened? Number one, I mean, I was speechless. I couldn't even think. I had to just sit for a couple of days. You're on mute, Michael.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It was, the emotions ran the gamut, right? From anger to frustration, to sadness, understanding what the impact of George Floyd's death is going to be to his daughter, his family. It really ran the gamut for me. One of the things that really came out of it was the cyclical nature of this type of racism, and that as a Black man and the way in which I grew up, it's very, very real to me. It is very real in terms of my walk of life, in my career, in my school education, the number of times I've had to deal with blatant racism simply because of the color of my skin. And to see that play out on national TV, it just kind of it was just cyclical to me because it's not the first time, right? We can go back a decade and we can look at Trayvon Martin, right? We can go back a couple of decades and we can look at Rodney King. We can go back decades after that and look at 1968 and Martin Luther King and the uprising and all those kind of things. This has been something that has plagued this country for decades. And there have been movements prior to this. It has resonated, but it ultimately has subsided, right? There's been progress, and then it subsides, and then there's something else. So I've really looked at that as, wow, what can we do differently? What I'm encouraged is the global impact of what we're seeing today, which I cannot remember that it has been such a global outpouring and outcry in the past. What I'm also encouraged is that it's all walks of life that are getting engaged to understand that we have a problem here. We have a systemic issue that is not going to take the victims, which are African Americans, to fix. It's going to take our brothers, our brethren and our sisters that are white Americans, Asian Americans. We are all going to have to work together in order to create a better future for our kids and our own legacy. So I can go on and on about what I felt with this situation, but I can say from a company perspective, I'm proud of the fact that we've stepped up and started to have these conversations, starting with the senior executives of the company, starting with memos that's coming out that's supporting that what we will do in stages of activities to first of all allow ourselves to have the conversation. And that becomes really systemic and cultural in and of itself in corporate America, to where you're not comfortable talking about race, religion, color. In some cases, you've been kind of educated not to do that because it's an uncomfortable place. In order for us to move forward, we have to first start having the conversations. And we have to start listening to our colleagues and understanding that we all come from different walks of life. We all have different perspectives and experiences around racism and unconscious biases and prejudices. And we all have a voice to share. And that without us exercising that voice, then our ability to move past this and create a better future for tomorrow is going to be extremely limited, because every person's voice matters. And if we're not comfortable in having those conversations, if we're not comfortable in being able to sit down and understand and bring awareness, and that's the other part. It's not just talking about it, it's the education and awareness around the why.
The why.
Why is this occurring? Why are we seeing protests in the street? Why are we seeing riots? What is going on? And there's a number of answers to that question, but without us taking the time to get educated on the why, then I think we're starting in a deficit. And so I think, our company recognizes that. We have started a lot of the conversations. I personally have conversations with my leadership team and just talking about how we can get better and recognizing what it is we're dealing with. We're promoting conversations throughout the entire company. We're providing websites that they can go to and get information that supports various movies, documentaries, and those kind of things that allow them to gain insight as to the systemic racism that we're dealing with. And then we're also going to be looking at then action items and plans and how we create a stronger value system, internal company value system, our values, about how we handle and deal with racism going forward. So it's a really, I think it's a sad time, but it's a great time. It's a great time from an opportunity for self-reflection. And I always look at this, Maxine, I'll say this last, I always look at this to say, these things, this perfect storm, all going through, there's a reason to that, right?
Yeah.
The pandemic, while as horrible as it is, what it's causing us to do is to slow down and pause and take a look at our own personal lives and the world in which we are in. And then when you start looking at the racial injustices, we're now seeing it and hearing it very differently than we would be if there were no pandemic. Because the rigors of life cause us to be doing so many things. We don't have time for this, we don't have time for that. We're caught up in this, we're caught up in that. But the pandemic has slowed all that down to now we are able to hear, we are able to see that this is a systemic issue and that we are now all raising up saying, oh no, we've got to do something to get to make this better.
Awesome, Michael. That's amazing. And you're right, you know, we're having to really pause. And so I'm coming over to Chloe. So Chloe, as Michael shared about that pause, you know, I talk about the 4 Ps. We have the pandemic, we need to pause, pray, and pivot. So I'm curious to know about you as a mom, a female, this whole Black Lives Matter movement. I know that it hits women a little bit differently because we're mothers too. And we have Black boys and we're like, oh my goodness. So as you think about those 4 Ps, you know, how did this hit you? What were you thinking when you saw all this happen?
I have to say, I'm glad you brought up the 4 Ps because, you know, prayer and my faith in God does lead my life. And so that is what carries me through all of my tough times. And as a mom, and I have to say, when I saw the video and he called out for his mom, and he said he lost his faith, that hit me really hard. That was just hard to hear as a mom. And so I would say that, yes, I have a Black son, I have a Black husband. And so, you know, as a Black person myself, you know, this is not new. This was not new to me, but I think as Michael said, because we've paused, you know, because sports are not on TV, because that usually takes away, you know, is a fantastic thing to watch, but it's something that, you know, people can do and not, you know, kind of take their mind away from what's happening today. And without all of that, they do have to focus on today. So it's been a hard time. I would say in our company, though, these conversations are not new. So we started, you know, having these corporate conversations around racial injustice in 2016 with Philando Castile. And what we have is, we call them building bridges conversations, where we just can have real talk about, you know, what's going on in people's minds. And so we had those, you know, the day after it happened, and then, you know, the next working day. And then, you know, with Rayshard Brooks, we continue to have these conversations. And so what's been encouraging for me is to see people around the world, as you said, get together and try to make meaningful change. This time it's different because people are uniting for change. More people are tired and more people want to see change. And so we started really getting together within our company and supporting each other in a way that we hadn't before, in terms of, number one, giving each other grace, you know, for this emotions, because, you know, there's mental health, there's stress, there's all the things that go along with everything that's going on externally. So number one, we've been giving each other grace, space to have these conversations. But we've also done a lot in terms of so our CEO, Julie Sweet, made a public statement. By September 1st, we're going to set external goals to increase our percentage of Black and Hispanic American people overall and managing directors. So we're looking at our people and our leadership, and those goals are going to be published externally. Same thing we did for women before. So there's going to be a roadmap for change. We're also introducing mandatory training to help people identify, speak up, and report racism. So we've always had, and that's going to be mandatory, we've always had unconscious bias training. We talk about unconscious bias, microaggressions, but as we started listening to people, and, you know, they've also experienced racism, you know, in many different forms. So we've stepped up, and we're going to be making that mandatory as well. And then finally, you know, I have the privilege of leading our Atlanta office. And so for me, working in the community is something that's going to be, very important. And so, and a lot of our people have signed up to make an impact in the community. So I've got over 200 people that have signed up to be part of a social justice committee to really, support and help, make a positive impact in the community. So what I'm doing is, working with different clients of ours plus community leaders to figure out how we can bring our strengths to the Atlanta community and really help make an impact.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm doing a time check right now. We are getting to 12:41. And Rebecca, how are we looking on questions in the Q&A?
We have got
You
three
wanna-
questions right now.
Okay, can you
Wanna go
share
ahead
with us what those questions are?
Sure. The first one is from Jeff. How can we bring conversations that are difficult around Black Lives Matter into the workplace? To the forefront of this needed change and justice and equality, to pick up the torch of John Lewis to this generation. And what are your organizations evolving after the conversation? What actions?
Okay, so that was a lot of information. So I want to turn it over to Mallom, but Rebecca, can you kind of give it to us a little bit more, just a shorter question? There was a lot in that.
Yeah, so I guess it's, how can you bring conversations that are difficult around Black Lives Matter to the workplace? Because this is the forefront for change and equality in the workplace. So how can you bring those conversations there? That's the first part. So why don't we do that first?
Sure. I'll jump right in, Maxine, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, one, I want to use the word dialogue versus conversations, and I want to make sure that it's a dynamic where we are able to express ourselves honestly, but also make room to listen and hear for change. Because I think that's the key to it. The other key to it is, and if you go and look at the Floyd thing, the thing that struck me was he said, "I can't breathe."
Mm-hmm.
The etymology of the word spirit is breath. So whether you're Black, white, Puerto Rican, or Haitian, the quote Tribe Called Quest, you all know what it feels like to not have a breath. That's the thing that connects us, right? That's the paradox of this pandemic, which is taking your breath, and the social justice as well. It's that paradox of taking our breath away, and a disparity between how some groups are thriving in this area and some are having a harder time, specifically Black people. The way that we can do it at work, if we start from that dynamic, that we have a challenge and how might we practice that challenge and work there, we can move with the way that sort of our corporate group does, where we start with this listening to each other, then we try to understand. First, before we try to feel understood, and then the second thing is, how do we all collectively jump into action? And it's our leaderships, we're coming to action, but it's also the people that are being led to hold the leaders accountable toward that action. You need the tension of both of those things.
Awesome. Did that answer Jeff's question, Rebecca? Hopefully it did. Great response, Mallom.
Thank you.
Next question, Rebecca.
This is one from Nigel. It's, what are you currently reading to help with your racial awareness?
Okay, we didn't hear you. Can you repeat that? We didn't hear the question.
What are you currently reading to help with your racial awareness education?
Vishal, you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm reading Biased, Jennifer Eberhardt's book, and I think it's beginning. It deals a lot with the unconscious, but beginning to deal with a lot of the conscious biases as well that we have. And small things that forces us to think differently, right? When we start accepting resumes, do we want names on the resumes anymore? And do we need to put alma mater in any of the resumes? Because see, bias is just not in one dimension.
There you go.
And so these are the kinds of questions that I think to myself, and at every time, what am I going to do differently? And one piece of advice that I took from the book, and I gave it to my 8-year-old daughter, I said, when you close your eyes and when you listen to someone, does it matter how they look, what they wear, what are their preferences? any of the elements that contribute to bias, are they even needed? And I've been practicing this with her for a very long time. And I take that and I pass that to my team as well. You come to the table with the fact that somebody is either incompetent or somebody does not have good ideas. How do you take bias out of that? And how do you start with level 0 or a 0 base every time you meet someone? Because in today's world, we're learning daily and it's information overload. I think I need to watch more rom-coms these days. I can't watch any of the other stuff. And it's getting to that point where you just, everything is a variable and everything is an analytical data point. How do you step back from that and just deal with people as human beings? How do you deal with people with the basic tenets that Mallom said, right? It's the spirit, it's the breath, it's the respect. Things that we, a 2-year-old, if you see a 2-year-old or 3-year-old in a swimming pool, they exhibit all the behavioral patterns that we need to exhibit. They don't care who that other person is, but we all do. And how do you put yourself in the shoes of my 3-year-old who approaches anyone without fear, trepidation, bias, anything, and puts his hand into their cookie jar and takes the cookie out and eats it. And the other person is lovingly giving it to the 3-year-old. But if I do that, I don't know how that's going to be perceived.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do we get to that? And that's been my biggest learning on how do we start behaving more like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds than us middle-aged monkeys, basically. Sorry.
So with the bias book, do you share that with your team? I mean, are they collectively reading it as well?
So I'm one of those people, I give people data points. I don't enforce or tell people. I don't buy 40 copies of bias and send it to my leadership team. I could do those kinds of things. I've done that in the past and have received some mixed feedback, not in these things. Some people everyone has their learning and healing process. And again, I don't want to bias what I have read to what they bring to the table. Gotcha. So I can tell them I'm doing this. I will never force this on someone because they're all very intelligent people. That's the basis with which you've self-selected all these individuals to be working with you. You have to pass a certain muster. So I'm not going to enforce that people have to read that or send it to them. People may take it differently. Some people may not like that media. Some people like some other media. So why am I doing that? So I'm going to let them learn and heal through their own process in some ways. But when the dialogue happens, that's where we set the bar and say we are all trying to solve the same problem.
Gotcha. Thank you. Rebecca, any other questions?
Yeah, we have 2 more. So This is from Danielle. And it's, what are your suggestions for making sure changes are made this time and the conversation continues?
Wow. Okay. What are your suggestions for making sure that change occurs this time? Is that what the question is?
Yes.
All right, Michael Sullivan.
That's a tough question. It really is a tough question because, like I said, you can ask that question from the centuries that racism and prejudice have existed and say, why didn't this level of support, or why at some point did it subside? All we can do is ensure that we play a role as an individual, right? And collectively as individuals, then we can create change, right? It is not on one person to create that change. It is on all of us to create that change. As long as we are committed and convicted in the fact that we know change has to occur, and we think about the legacy that we leave behind. For Vishal mentioned, his children, right? I think about that all the time. And Chloe, you talk about God, and I'm definitely a God-fearing man. I think about when God's children enter the world, they're full of love. They don't see color. They don't see religion. They don't see any of that. It is just absolute love. but it is what we do to them as they grow up throughout society that formulates prejudices and biases and those kind of things. And so it's how do we want to leave a legacy for the future generation? And I thank God that when you look at the protesters, it is the future generation that's out there standing up saying, we have to do this thing differently. So I would say that how do we keep this alive is that we play our role. Let's be a voice. Let's constantly ask the question, what can we do? Let's not allow ourselves to just say, okay, we've done enough, and then pass the torch. It has to be a continuous thing, right? It has to be part of our culture, part of our values, that we maintain that consistency, that we carry it forward. And we do that in all different other walks of life, right? When whether it's religion, whether it's whatever it may be, we constantly use that and educate that to be a foundation that we pass forward. And I just think we have an opportunity to look at where we are today and take advantage of that and not shy away from the opportunity to say, well, if Trinell doesn't say anything, I'm not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
For fear of retribution, for fear of whatever. I mean, be true to yourself. And if you have a voice and you have something to say, if you don't feel that you're getting the proper support from senior level managers in your organization, then try to sit down and have the conversation, right? Try to build a consortium of employees or colleagues on the floor and say, we'd like to start this conversation and this dialogue about how we can do some things within the company, right? Be a catalyst, right? Move and don't just sit on your hands and just not say anything and watch it happen around you. Because to be honest with you, if that's what we do, we're just as fault as the people who are prejudiced and racist and what they're bringing to the table.
Maxine,
Absolutely. Yes.
I just want to add something if I can, because
I was going to ask you a question, so I'm glad you chimed in. Because and when you're thinking about what you're going to add, I want you to think about the fact that we just lost two kings in our community, right? Two kings, John Lewis and Dr. C.T. Vivian, and thinking about the charge that we have, the legacy that they've left. So as you're, responding and wrapping us up, we have about 7 minutes. I want you to tell me, your thoughts about that.
Both of them, first of all, my sincere sorrow, and I've shed a tear for both of them. These are people that were beaten on television.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to blood came out of C.T. Vivian's mouth, and to the plate actually had to be put in the head of John Williams, just for us to have the opportunity to have these conversations from our leadership roles within these corporations that we weren't accepted in historically. So I always want to give thanks. They're now joining our ancestors, so they're still with us, and their legacy is still with us. It's our responsibility to carry that forward. But I'm glad you brought those up, and many others that have suffered for us to get to this point. I'm glad you brought those names up because that sort of contextualizes what I would like to say. When we have these conversations, the most important thing is that we're speaking to the issues, not just focusing on outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because we've got to get to the ideology of it, and speaking specifically to Black men and Black women, to start with, when you talk about what to read, is educating ourselves beyond the history that was given to us by our oppressor. Our lives did not start at slavery. We were here before 1619. We were the foundation of all of history, math, and science. You just check out anything about Nile Valley civilization, any book J.A. Rogers ever wrote, Dr. Ben has ever wrote, or look at Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark. There's a documentary called The Great and Mighty Walk. It's on YouTube for free. Just watch that and see our contributions go way beyond that. Mm. We built the pyramids, the formation of a faith system of one God, of the idea that there was a God, came from Kemetic, melanated people. That's a fact, it's documented. And once we start from that ideology, that who we are, if you are less melanated, your origin person on this planet looked a lot like Chloe and Trinell and Maxine. Period. That's the science of that. You can check out dominant recessive gene theory to get there, however you want to move to it. So we are all from one. We all move from that space. And if we understand that piece and begin our discussions by understanding who we are, not who people have defined us to be, that's the first step in making sure this is not just fireworks that were launched and everyone's making noise in the street, but it becomes like a satellite where, like John Lewis and C.T. Vivian.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Rebecca, I'm not sure if we have any more questions. We have about 4 minutes, but I want to thank you, each of you, for your leadership, your influence, your insight, and expertise today. We can talk about this for hours. I mean, there's so much more that we can share, but I'm so thankful and honored that you took time out today to speak to the Technology Association of Georgia community and to share insight relative to what's going on around us in our communities. Again, thank you very much. Rebecca, do we have any more questions? I think we have about 4 minutes.
We do. Okay, so what do you see as the top 2 impactful changes corporate America can make today in relation to inequality?
Say that one more time. And Chloe, if you wouldn't mind answering that as we close.
What do you see as the top 2 impactful changes corporate America can make today in relation to inequality?
You got it, Chloe?
I got it. So the top 2 changes that corporate America make in relation to inequality. So I would say corporations need to look at their own corporation. And that's one thing that we're doing to really understand, what can we impact within our own corporation? And that's number 1. So look at your own corporation and address it internally. I suggested ways Accenture is doing it. But the other thing is, if you're in a corporation that doesn't have all of the resources that we have at Accenture, team with another organization, get that knowledge and support your people. And that's going to be really critical because your people are your greatest asset. And so making sure your people feel supported, partnering with external community organizations. I'm a member of the Executive Leadership Council. I know we have resources there. Accenture has resources. Find another organization that you can partner with if you don't have the knowledge to carry it forth. And I just want to say one last thing as I think about Congressman Lewis. My son was just such a big fan of his. He still is. He read the book March, and all I can say is, please encourage people to vote. I mean, that's what we're doing in our company. That's what we're doing in the organizations I'm part of. So as part of that legacy, please vote and encourage people to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Rebecca, I'm turning it over to you. And I think that's our time.
Yes, thank y'all so much for attending today. And this will be recorded on our virtual channel, so you can check out at any time. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.